Hello everybody and welcome back to the Health Wealth Podcast for another episode. We have a great treat in store for you this week. I'm speaking to Jeff Webster. He's the founder and CEO of Hunter and Gather. We get into some real details about his journey for setting up the business, about the truths about seed oils, why they're harming us, why we need to get them out of our diet. We talk about processed sugars. We talk about how you can eat optimally, and we dig into some details as well of what the food industry is really like and the things that they can actually get away with on the nutritional information on food, and some of the things that go on, which really is going to open your eyes and blow your mind a bit to what we're actually being fed and what they're getting away with for us and taking our money and making us sicker. So definitely tune in. You're interested in nutrition, you're interested in health, this is an episode for you. So let's jump right on in and enjoy the show. Well, hello, Jeff. Welcome to the show. It's been a long time coming, this one. It's good to finally have you on.
Ryan, great to be here. Yeah, I think it's been a good few months, if not even a year in the making, right?
Yeah, it probably is nearly a year since we first spoke on LinkedIn. So yeah, it's definitely been one I've been looking forward to. So, let's jump right in. First off, tell us a bit about yourself and your story, whether there was, anything along your story in terms of health issues that got you going down the path you've gone down. And then as we go along, we'll find out more about you and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. So, I'm Jeff, co-founder of Hunter and Gather, inspired lifestyle brand. Obviously, have a mix of products across kitchen staples and supplements. But yeah, I think the journey really starts in 2012. A chance encounter with a Team GB physio, and just for the record, I've said this many times, I was nowhere near Team GB level. But this chap called Phil, he was a physio and he worked with Team GB athletes. And I went to him to see about a knee injury I had, iliotibial band. And one of the first things he said to me was, "Jeff, what are you eating?" I said, "Phil, what do you mean, what am I eating? I'm here to get my knee fixed." And he's like, no, just listen. See, what you put into your mouth contributes to something called systemic inflammation. And as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 21-year-old, I was like, what do you mean, systemic inflammation? And he explained it to me a little bit, and he said, go and watch this video. And it was by a chap called Gary Torbs, who we know obviously from Good Calories, Bad Calories, Why We Get Fat, all that sort of good stuff. And for some reason, as a 21-year-old who was studying building surveying at university, I did go back home. I did watched the YouTube video. Actually, it was with the founder of Diet Doctor, Andreas. And for some reason, that 45-minute interview absolutely switched the light bulb on. It was a paradigm shift. Went down the rabbit hole of low carb, paleo, keto, but there was not much in this way of obviously information online back 12 years ago. That was kind of the catalyst for a real mindset shift in terms of how the body utilizes different fuel substrates, et cetera. And that was where this real passion for discovering more started. And I spent about 3, 4, 5 years just being obsessed about it and reading as many blog articles as possible back then. That was kind of the inception of where my journey started in health.
Yeah. Now that's interesting that it was at that age to have really, I think a lot of 21-year-olds might have dismissed that and not even watched the video, or even if they watched it, just been like, whatever. So yes, it's quite interesting that at that age, it really took hold of you and you really become passionate about that.
Yeah, taking hold is a key word there. It really did. It became an obsession. And I'm not too sure, it feels almost like a gift was given to me. And some say at the time he's just a typical millennial wanting to change the world, but it really did feel like I'd been given this information and we had to find the best way possible for us to convey it to the world. And as I say, I spent 4 or 5 years trying to work out how that looked. But yeah, why does a 21-year-old 12 years ago stumble across this? Most bizarre thing. I'd never been overweight or had excess fat. I was a poorly teenager, so I had kind of IBS, asthma, eczema, probably 30 courses of antibiotics throughout my childhood, if not more. I was on a really severe acne medication as well, called Roaccutane, literally a year before finding out about kind of the low carb approach. So there was a few things that kind of led into me, being being receptive, I think is the right word.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think when people do finally get it, it's quite an eye-opening moment when they realize how much what we eat affects our health. Because for most people, they're quite blasé and quite ignorant of the fact. And then you tell people, and lots of people, it still doesn't go in. But when it clicks, I think it's quite a big shift in people's thinking because it makes a huge difference.
For sure. I mean, I was very militant in those early days. I've got some of my journals back from 2013, 2014 of kind of measuring blood ketones with the old school meters and all sorts, and writing down gym workouts and running workouts and understanding what's happening to my glucose and ketones, because a lot of this information wasn't democratized like it is now. I mean, it's been disseminated far and wide, and you can literally like go down so many rabbit holes now and just come out of it actually confused, because I find this almost too much information.
Yeah.
But back then, like 10 years ago, if you said to someone on the street, you could put your type 2 diabetes into remission through lifestyle intervention, they would say, like, you're crazy. You need to be taken to an asylum. And it wasn't even in the doctor's vocabulary to even talk about lifestyle when it came to diabetes.
Yeah.
They just said it was a degenerative condition that got worse. Yeah. So to see that shift in the last 3 years or so, just in the last week, I've heard 2 people just in my local friends like network saying that family members have been told by their significantly reduce their carbohydrate intake, which I think is really a really good thing.
Yeah, definitely that is, because it's if we can get the message to the doctors and coming out of the medical profession, it's going to make a much bigger impact. And they've been very resistant to that. So that's great. If people are starting to get that advice from doctors, that's absolutely brilliant.
I think there's 2 parts to it, and I think the grassroots doctors, I think a lot of them are starting to wake up to it and are starting to realize, because how can you not? But I think the influences at the top that don't want the current system to be shifted are probably resistant. And when you see headlines, I think they're from a very noisy few people.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely true. When you first got into this, as you said, 10, 12 years ago, where were you finding your information? Because obviously you said, like, now, especially the last couple of years, it's really blown up. We've got social media, we've got YouTube, there's all these podcasts. Where were you actually going for that information?
Yeah, initially it was a lot of books. So you had The Art and Science of Low-Carb. Have I still got you there, Ryan?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. You were something you'd frozen me.
It cut for a second, but yeah.
Yeah, no. So I read a lot of books initially, and Gary Taubes had a good few books. Jeff Webster and Stephen Finney, who are proponents of ketogenic, had some really good books as well. I think The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate. So yeah, books were the main source. I mean, podcasts weren't even a thing. YouTube wasn't really a thing. And I remember a really good blog called The Eating Academy, which was Peter Attia's initial blog when he was actually an advocate of a lower carbohydrate approach rather than everything in moderation and count your calories. So obviously his approach has shifted somewhat over the years. So it was initially that, and Mark Sisson as well, Chris Kresser. So those kind of early kind of pioneers in the space, some would say.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's the thing, the information has been there for quite a while, but I think it's been very hard for people to get to it, which is the benefit. There's lots of negatives to social media and everything, but one of the positives is that it's now a lot easier for people to access that information that has always been there. We just haven't really been able to access it and to tap into it, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think arguably it's become even too fragmented. I see many conversations and it's almost become too nuanced and too fragmented and too in the weeds. And individuals that are kind of come into this space in an ancestrally inspired lifestyle, as we call it, or one that's a huge deviation away from the standard Western diet, it's like paralysis by analysis. So it's how can you keep things simple? And what we say at Hunter and Gather is remove seed oils, remove grains, and remove refined sugars. They're the 3 kind of the three pillars that we talk about, or three promises within our kind of products and the gateway of food. But there's obviously 9 other pillars of health that we talk about within our brand that try to simplify it. Because if you go onto Instagram, or if you listen to podcasts, no slight on podcasts here, but there's many podcasts that just conflicting messages week on week. And I think it's quite a challenging time, in fact.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think one of the things is that people crave to be relevant and to have that attention, especially when they've got it originally, and saying the same thing over and over, people are going to get bored of it. So I think there's a lot of people out there, these influencers, and they're always trying to find this new thing that they can promote because they need to stay relevant. And then it just ends up switching. And like you say, it's, those 3 things that you promote is perfect. Just keep it. We only need to keep it simple. For most people, just simplifying it and will get them to where they need to be. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I see that a lot, and it frustrates me a lot. An influencer one week is saying this, and the next week they're saying something that's the opposite, and you're like, come on, it's not helping anyone doing that.
For sure, it becomes confusing.
Yeah, definitely. So anyway, you mentioned your business a couple of times. What was it that brought you to that, to the decision and starting that up?
Yeah, the elevator pitch is essentially, I should be living. So we just started a business, and that does our talking for us. And just recently, in fact, we had several billboards and digital advertising boards across London, which was a real pinch me moment. 7 years on from starting the business to have these fairly provocative messages across London was quite fantastic. But no, it was like I say, a 5-year journey really, from understanding these concepts and feeling a huge shift within myself. And it was a real kind of inward looking moment of understanding, well, how can I help disseminate this information? Do I become a doctor? I actually looked into graduate entry medicine for quite a considerable amount of time and positioned myself to go down that path. And I was actually quite petrified because it's a massive institution. When you look into it more so, you're almost captured within that institution, and you need to operate within guidelines. And those guidelines are somewhat influenced, and that's probably a 10 episode series right there in itself. But yeah, I looked at nutritional therapy. I looked at kind of personal training and all these ways that I could express this and disseminate this information. And my co-founder, Amy, who is my partner in life as well, we've been together for 15 years now. She worked in corporate food. She worked at Mars, which people, Mars bar essentially, and they're a massive food conglomerate. And she worked within the pet side of things. And she saw some things that she wasn't best pleased about. And essentially she moved away from there because she could see how this massive big entity was influencing what's on the shelves within the pet food space. And she switched gears and moved to a startup challenger brand called Lily's Kitchen that offered a grain-free organic pet food. And they were really penetrating that category and creating a whole step change within that category on shelves in supermarkets and retailers, etc. So it wasn't that kind of the vets were saying, hey, you should have this food, it's better, so go and buy it. It was actually a brand that was creating a shift within the marketplace. And it was kind of a light bulb moment where I was like, we could do this. Like we want these products. No one's doing it here in the UK or Europe. Let's see if we can do it. And we didn't kind of think, we could create a multi-million pound brand that's going to go into all the retailers and hit hundreds of thousands of people. It was kind of a, hey, let's see what we can do. And it was as stupid as that, really.
That's brilliant. What was the original reception you got in terms of when you were, obviously I imagine you maybe approached retailers and people like that. What was the responses you got?
For the first 5 years, it was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
I'll break that down. So we launched the business back in 2017, and the route to market was I sat there for 6 hours and built, well, actually the YouTube video was 6 hours. It took me about 6 weeks to build this website by pressing pause, doing a bit, pressing pause, doing a bit. So we built the first website like that, and it was D2C before D2C was a thing, direct to consumer. And we went into a few paleo Facebook groups and said, hey, we've got this seed oil free mayonnaise, this avocado oil mayonnaise. Is anyone interested? And we kind of just started getting sales like that. It was, before the time that Instagram was a thing, TikTok wasn't even thought about, I don't think. So it was as organic as that at the time. We did manage to get some early traction with Whole Foods Market in London. So I think they had 7 or 9 stores at a time. And because of Amy's experience working in sales in the pet food space, she knew how to get into retail. So we had that small advantage. We also managed to get listed on Ocado as well pretty early on. So that was kind of the early traction we got in retail. But the business really built via our own website and Amazon, and kind of the retailers remained a small part up until just recently, because retailers work in this really inagile model where every space on that shelf has a commercial value. And essentially there is typically one person within that business who gets paid quite a lot of money from bigger brands to have that space, and it's not as conspiratorial as that, but essentially that space is worth a lot of money and they get a substantial amount of marketing money for that space. So to take a bet on a smaller brand that has a somewhat unconventional message is a big bet, right?
Yeah.
It took a long time to prove ourselves in other spaces to then be able to say, hey, look, here's an undeniable stack of evidence that the consumer wants this. There is a shift within the marketplace. Within that time, I think plant-based and veganism became quite prominent between 2019 and 2022. And all of the investment money was channeled that way. All of the media was channeled that way. And it was quite frustrating, because we go to retailers and they'll be like, oh, is it vegan or plant-based? It's like, no, it's not. It's seed oil free. It uses, the best British free-range eggs that we can source in a liquid form, not spray dried. But they just didn't want to know. But we've seen that shift in the past 18 months where they now understand there is messaging around seed oils and UPFs, for instance, which we used to call junk food, right? Yeah. So there's been this narrative switch that has enabled brands such as ours to come to prominence and get that space and get that airtime, which has been great.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
We are now in Tesco's, which is quite phenomenal to go from no big grocery supermarkets into the UK's leading supermarket, who have 28% market share, and to get in front of those hundreds of thousands and if not millions of eyeballs each week. So great for the space.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And that is a great achievement. In fact, it was Amazon was where I first found your product and used your product for that. That's where I first got it. But I did see that you were in Tesco stores, and that, that's brilliant. It's good progress. As you say, the last couple of years, it's really started coming more to the forefront of the conversation. So obviously the first of your rules within Hunter Gatherer is the no seed oils, and we've mentioned them a lot. So, what is it about seed oils? Can you tell us a bit about what it is about them that makes them unhealthy for us and why we should be avoiding them?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm absolutely no expert in any of this information. I'm a generalist. I see things through a very simple lens of being ancestrally inspired, and obviously we then couple that with modern day technology, right?
Yeah.
I look at it simply that seed oils have been in our diet for 100 years, and obviously correlation does not mean causation, but you can't have causation without correlation. And there's a stark correlation between the consumption and increased consumption of seed oils and these oils that were used historically as lubricants and had to be hybridized and all sorts of stuff to be fit for human consumption. So I think that within itself kind of raises eyebrows. You can go down into the physiology and all sorts of different aspects in terms of omega-6 to omega-3 ratios, linoleic acid, all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of things. And obviously, even in the last 12 months or so, there's been differing thoughts on what the mechanism behind seed oils and what particular elements of it are causing humans issues. All I know is it wasn't in our diet 300 years ago. So that's enough for me. Yeah. But if you want more information, on our website, we do have a 10,000 Word article that's got about 180 different references, written by Tim Rees, one of our nutritional writers, which goes into all these different elements into great detail. And Kate Shanahan, in fact, was someone that I followed her advice about 10 years ago as well. So very early on when she was working with the LA Lakers, I think it was.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of information out there. And like you said, there's some, people might argue the different mechanisms for it, but from what we know and from what we see, it's pretty obvious that they're doing something bad to us, whichever mechanism it is by. And like you said, they weren't even designed for human consumption at first. And if you look at, I mean, all someone has to do is Google the actual process they go through to make seed oils, and that should be enough alone to put you off from
The
going
use
anywhere
of
near them.
solvents and hexanes is not great.
No.
But one of the latest kind of plausible mechanisms that I've heard about how it's actually reducing the IQ of humans is by the linoleic acid actually pushes out and stops omega-3 from coming into, or DHA, I think it is, coming into the brain. Again, it's not something I've heard of before, but it's like, that's really quite plausible.
Yeah.
But then you have those that deny it and exonerate seed oils and say seed oils are the best thing, but it's typically an ingredient that goes into their meal replacement shake, which is a £250 million company.
Yeah, exactly. There always seems to be some kind of financial incentive behind the people who are promoting them. And I mean, with brain health as well, I think it's Dr. Georgia Ede. I've seen her talking about the fact that seed oils the linoleic acid can get into the brain, cross the blood-brain barrier, and then the brain doesn't know what to do with it and tries to use it as energy instead, and struggles with energy issues, which leads to more mental health things. So I think there's a number of different mechanisms by which it causes it, and it's definitely something we need to steer clear of.
But yeah, I won't stand here and obviously the seed oil message is huge in our brand, but I won't stand here and say, hey, I believe this is what causes it or that. I think removing it for 30 days and see how you feel is a good first step.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And keeping it simple, as you said, in your steps is always a good thing. And like you said there, removing it yourself, I think what's come to the fore the last couple of years as well, I think, is that N=1, and that just getting that personal experience now. And you can't trust all these things that you're told from whoever it is, whether it's governments, a health influencer, a doctor. We need to experience it for ourselves. And I think anyone should try something first, because I think that we've started to really see the benefit of people doing that in recent times.
For sure. I mean, there's a reason why many of the kind of the diet plans of years gone by were for 21 or 28 days, because that sort of time gives you a fantastic window to see and feel a difference. Whenever Amy and I, for instance, have or think we've consumed seed oils at a restaurant when we have asked not to be, inevitably it happens, right? In daily life, it does happen from time to time, and we can always feel a difference. Our eyelids feel like they're heavy and inflamed, and when you think that the majority of people literally everyone is walking around like that all the time, no wonder the condition of society is how it is.
Yeah. No, exactly. You do. I'm the same. That I think once you cut them out and you eat clean, as soon as you eat something that contains them or contains stuff you wouldn't normally eat, you do really feel that difference. But most people don't, because they're just feeling that terrible all the time, and that's why they don't notice the difference. But you definitely notice it once you take it out. And I think that ancestrally we probably had about a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6s, and nowadays it's pretty common for people to be about 40-to-1 or even 70-to-1, which is pretty shocking when you think about it.
It's wild. It is wild.
It is, right. But other than using your products, obviously, what are other ways that you avoid seed oils and that other people can? What are some of the things that you've found that are a good way to replace them, maybe? Because we know they're in so much.
Yeah, I mean, limit eating out, or at least if you know where you're eating out, just ask, make yourself a pain in the ass, and just say,
Yeah.
I've got an allergy to rapeseed and sunflower oil and then any other seed oils. make food from scratch. I think food doesn't, particularly in the UK, we have this kind of recipe book culture where every meal needs to be this flamboyant occasion. But I think somewhat society has shifted where it hasn't got to be this flamboyant recipe every time. Like food can be absolutely delicious, being quite simple.
Yeah.
Today, for instance, I had two grass-fed burgers for lunch. Actually, it was breakfast at 3 o'clock, just because of how the day was panning out. With some of our unsweetened ketchup, with some butter on the side. Like, it was as simple as that for me. So things don't have to be complicated. It's when you see people like they go to Whole Foods and they get the salad from the salad bar. I think they're being super healthy. They get the dressing on top. How else? Just use tallow, use butter. Don't be afraid of saturated fat. Again, I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I've been doing it for so long that you just become acclimatized to what you do.
Yeah.
But what say you? What's your kind of living in a different country? What's your go-to ways of removing them?
Yes, similar to you in that if you're making your own food, then you've got control over what's going in, and then cooking. I think the main thing where it goes is where people get it from is processed food and cooking, because obviously everyone was told to don't cook with animal fats, cook with these oils because they're better for you. And so if you can replace that and cook with just animal fats, and if you can make your own food mostly using single ingredient things, and even if you are going to use a sauce or something like you said, like with your products, you can find ones that don't have seed oils in, and then that's a pretty easy way, I think, to get past it and to not have them around. But like any processed food, I always tell people at first is just to start reading ingredients, because every single food with an ingredients list, even if you think why would there even be seed oils in it, you're just guaranteed to find it there.
Yeah, like olives, for instance.
Yeah.
Olives in a chilled section have seed oils. Olive in the ambient section don't have seed oils. They have brine instead. Um, so yeah, there's all these things. I'm so accustomed to just like not even viewing that section as food in the supermarket, but I appreciate the ones that are different, obviously, different stages of the journey. But yeah, certainly just turn the back of pack over and have a look, and it will be lurking there somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think I always say to people as a rough guide, if it's got more than like 3 to 5 ingredients, the first two are pretty much guaranteed to be seed oil and sugar of some description, which you want to steer clear of. I know you said as well your number two, I think, was avoiding grains as well.
Mm.
So what are some of the reasons for avoiding grains?
Yeah, so for me and many people that we have as customers, and I know anecdotally and N equals one, um, GI distress, they
Yeah.
cause significant GI distress. They're thought to have anti-nutrients such as phytates and lectins and all sorts of stuff. But again, certain people call that out as misinformation and quackery. Um, they're probably pesticide residue heavy. Um, they're converted in the body and treated a bit like sugar. So they'll spike insulin. And they're pretty much in junk food, right? In processed food, unless you have an organic rice. And I know some people within the ancestral space have now started to adopt eating organic rice and bits like that. It doesn't do great for me. I feel like I'm a little bit tetchy when I have it. Don't feel quite right. But yeah, that's generally why we see that removing grains is it removes that carbohydrate burden that we feel a lot of people's metabolism just can't actually process in kind of the way we live now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Again, it's going back to what you said about the ancestral thing, which is another thing that I like to go at, is just looking at what humans would have eaten um, ancestrally. And obviously, grains wouldn't have been there up until the agricultural revolution. And even then, in a lot of societies, there still wouldn't have been much of it. But the way they're processed nowadays as well, and like you said, the pesticides, I think, is one of the biggest issues with them nowadays. I think grains hold on to the pesticides and things like that the most, and it really comes through with them. So, yeah, I mean, everyone kind of intuitively knows that they feel worse after eating a big kind of carb heavy meal. You feel heavy, you feel like you've got no energy, but we don't tend to put two and two together and realize. why, but it's pretty obvious. Your body gives you a pretty quick response that it's not really enjoying that.
Exactly. We've actually got another article on the website that goes into the history of grains. And you read that and you think, why did we ever start cultivating grains in the first place? I mean, they're actually super hard to cultivate in the first place, and the nutritional bang for the buck is lacking.
Yeah.
So it was more of a subsistence fallback food rather than a thrive food.
Yeah, definitely. I think with a lot of those things, it was literally just for survival. We needed to get extra sustenance from somewhere else, and things like grains, and that was what we turned to. It wasn't that it was optimal for us, and it's not that it was the majority of our diet, which it now is. Even up to like 100 years ago, it wasn't the majority of our diet, whereas now it's up to like 60-70% is carbohydrates, and a lot of that being grains for most people's diet. So you can see the big shift that there's been, and also we can see the results, of course, in people's health.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even anthropological records from like 10,000 years ago and before, so like you can obviously do the stable isotope test, and you can see that we consumed a lot more protein than what we do now. And I actually had an exchange on LinkedIn recently with a very prominent chief scientific educator at a very prominent London university, who was advocating that we should reduce our red meat consumption down to no more than 70 grams per day.
Wow.
Which I think is around 18 grams of protein. And it's they're obviously study. But you look back through the anthropological records and the stable isotope test, and shows that the protein consumption was obviously a lot higher than what it is now. And then through that journey of 10,000 years, when it's thought that agriculture came in, but the degeneration within human beings has been like astronomical.
Yeah.
And then you've got the fantastic work, actually I forgot to mention this at the outset, but the fantastic work of Weston A. Price within nutritional and physical degeneration, who in the 1930s went around the world to observe, obviously, his findings, and to observe cultures and tribes that were still traditional and those that actually brought in Western foods, be it the processed grains, be it the seed oils. And just in one generation, it was a staggering difference. But for me, that's the purest observational science I think that exists, because that was before big marketing really got involved, and before huge vested interests were really involved. So it's a fascinating insight and window into history.
Yeah, definitely. I think our height has shrunk, our brain size has shrunk, the bone density has shrunk. It's gone down. We've only gone backwards since introducing them, and if you go back as far as well, the Egyptians, which were really the ancient society that had the highest amount of grains in their diet, really, we can tell a lot from them because of the mummification. A lot of them are still in good condition, and we can see that they had things like heart disease and diabetes rife, and they were high in grains. No other society back then had those issues. So there's a lot there, like you say, anthropologically, there's a lot there, and I think that's why it doesn't get talked about. When people are talking about it in general, they'll talk about these studies that have been done recently that have been paid for by food companies. They don't really go back in time and talk about it because it doesn't add up to what they're promoting.
No, instead it's classed as misinformation.
Yes. Yeah.
I think the most insidious part of the grains is the whole grains, healthy whole grains.
Yeah.
And I think it's just really got into the psyche of consumers, and consumers will still go for the whole grain bread, for instance. When I remember vividly when I was 16 years old, I'd just gone into sixth form, and I was into the gym and trying to bulk up and stuff, and I started to eat malted wheat bread. It was advertised as being healthier. Within 2 weeks, I was having these incredible stomach cramps. I wonder what was happening. And I went for an interview at IKEA. It's a part-time job was at sixth form. And I was on a train home, and I got these. It felt like I was being stabbed in the stomach, and I had to get off the train and actually called an ambulance for myself. And I was kept in overnight and put onto morphine because I had no idea what was causing these stomach pains. Sat down with my parents, and it's like, what have I changed the past month or so? And even back then, it was like, oh yeah, this wheat's not good for me. So I just removed it and never ate it again, and kind of never got stomach pains again. But back then, even the doctors wasn't even aware of things like IBS and gastro disorders.
Yeah,
It just
definitely.
things spring into my mind. I remember them. I'm like, oh yeah, that was a funny anecdote.
Yeah, no, I remember before I really got into health and began to learn more about it. I would have said to people, yeah, whole grains healthier, have whole grain bread and whole grain pasta and rice. And it's funny. We get so convinced by it when there's no evidence for it. And the heart healthy thing as well. And that reminds me of seed oils as well, because obviously seed oils are supposedly, heart healthy. That's the thing they put behind it. But there's only been a couple of properly done studies. Obviously, nutritional science, as I'm sure you know if you've looked into it, a lot of it is absolutely pointless. But there's only been a couple of ones done years ago which were actually decent. And they all showed that seed oils actually had worse outcomes, and so they were hidden. I think there was the Sydney diet heart study maybe, and the Minnesota coronary study, and they hid the results because it actually showed that the only thing it did was lowered cholesterol, but they had worse results. So the seed oils aren't heart healthy either.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's bonkers. But then you get some really prominent kind of fitness influencers that the whole shtick is about calories, and
Yeah.
calories is a whole interesting topic within itself. And obviously, it's a measurement of heat and light photons in particular. And they have the approach of everything really well into the food industry's hands, because ultimately, if the food industry got behind being more nuanced and saying, actually, do you know what? Carbohydrates aren't good for you, or these seed oils aren't good for you. It rules out literally 95% of the food industry.
Yeah.
So when people go and when people say, "Oh, that's conspiracy theory," well, it's not conspiracy theory. What it actually is the status quo for this system is this, and it's in no one's interest within that system to change it.
Yeah.
So obviously we've got the political landscape that's happening right now in the US. Only time will tell if that comes to fruition or if it's voter capture, etc. Who knows? I'm a skeptic by nature and a cynic by nature, so only time will tell. But yeah, there's interesting messages that are pushed by interesting people at interesting times.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. And we have to remember that they're businesses and they want to make money. And so they're going to promote a message that is going to lead to them selling the most products and making the most profit. And that's what they do. And like you said, everyone going back to cooking for themselves and eating with whole ingredients and getting them from a local farm shop is not going to help them. So obviously they're not going to support that message. So, we have to, I wouldn't say understand it from their point of view because I still think morally it's wrong, but we have to understand why they're doing it. There's an obvious reason why they're doing it.
Mm-hmm. The CEO that manages one of these businesses, for instance, probably isn't a bad person, probably has good intentions. That's the crazy thing about this. But they become so disconnected from the outcome of what happens is they're absolutely got no clue what's actually happening. And then you've got things like lifestyle medicine that's sponsored and created by a Coca-Cola company, for instance. Again, all this thing, none of it's conspiracy. This is all in plain sight for people to see, but it's so well, it's very well positioned.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's all captured, isn't it? And it's all money and money talks. And the nutritional studies, that promote cereal as healthier and bacon and eggs as unhealthy are sponsored by Kellogg's and people like this. And, you only have to look at who's sponsoring a study to know whether there's any point even reading it, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, I've taken up quite a bit of your time, but before you go, obviously, you've been involved in the food industry for a while now. Um, are there any things about it that really shocked you when you came across them or found out, or has it been, kind of how you expected things to be?
Yeah, there's a few interesting anecdotes. One for all the calorie counters out there. For instance, on the back of pack, when it says nutritional information, it will always say typical nutritional values. So essentially, the calories that are indicated on back can be up to 20% out above or below, which means it can be a 40% variance. So that's something that's super interesting. And protein content of certain foods. I was just chatting to a guy yesterday whose previous role was selling sports supplements, and he knew that one particular brand, because they've done their own studies of the product, was actually, they were saying it was 25 grams of protein, but in fact it was 18 grams. And those sorts of unethical things happen. When we first went out to produce our mayonnaise, we spoke to a few different manufacturers, and things such as egg yolk, if it's in a powder form, it doesn't have to be declared on the back of pack as powder form. It can just be declared as egg yolk, which is like blew our mind. And then things like sodium dioxide can be in there as a flow agent, but if it's below 1%, it hasn't got to be declared. So all these things that kind of exist within the food industry is pretty bonkers. I think a really frustrating thing within the retail space is people watch Dragon's Den or The Apprentice here in the UK, and they'll be like, guys, how come you're not in Tesco's or Sainsbury's or Waitrose or in Holland and Barrett before we were? And it's like, well, it takes a long time. And essentially the frustrating thing is that you may have ultimate conviction in what you're doing, and the consumer is buying your products via Amazon or your own website. And by the way, Amazon, we're conflicted in working with Amazon because obviously the connotations associated with it and how they operate. But ultimately, you've got to be where the consumer is, where the customer is, and a lot of customers shop on Amazon. Yeah. That's a side note. But ultimately, twice a year, if you're lucky, if you can take space on that shelf. And if that 6 months or 12 months goes by and it's a no, you have to wait another 6 or 12 months. So it's a big long game sometimes to get in front of customers and be where they want you to be. When we got into Tesco's, it was resounding positivity by our customer base, but there was one or two or a handful of customers that were really disappointed, saying that we'd sold out. And it's like, no, it's the same product. Like it's the same great product. It's just going to be available nationwide now, and for customers that wouldn't have known about us before. So it's actually a really great thing for the space that we work in, and we're here to try and change a food system and change the status quo. So yeah, I guess that was somewhat surprising, but maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can understand some people being put out, but like you said, it's, if you want to grow the awareness and you want to grow the brand, obviously you have to work with these bigger bigger businesses to get in there. So if you're going to stay small forever, then you're not going to be able to grow it anymore and reach more people. So yeah, no, it's got to be done. Like you said, it's still the same product.
And yeah, interestingly, we were told never to work with Holland and Barrett, and we were told never to work with Tesco's. We've been working with Holland and Barrett now for 2.5 years, and Tesco for 6 months, and both have been an absolute joy to work with. Both have been great supporters in our unconventional message, and yeah, it's been an incredible platform for us to actually help spread that ancestrally inspired message and to spread the seed oil free message. So yeah, you need to use these huge platforms that are part of kind of the legacy system somewhat, because if you don't, there's going to be swaths of the population that you're never going to reach otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a welcome surprise, a welcome good surprise.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of generations that still social media is not really their thing. They're not on there, and they're doing still the traditional things and going to the supermarket to shop. And so if you got to reach those people, you got to go to where they are. So I think it's great. I think what you guys doing are great in terms of the product and also in terms of the message you're pushing, and hopefully it's going to continue to grow as it has, and I'm absolutely sure it will do.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much. I was going to say, if any listeners want to learn more, like head over to, don't even come and buy product, just head over to our Start Here tab on our website, and it's our new Now We Rise hub, and essentially is a great kind of 60-second shareable video, and then 9 pillars of health and the research articles, etc. that I mentioned about seed oils, grains, sugars. They're on there. I mean, they're like 2-hour reads within themselves. They should be in a book. That might come one day. But there's a whole host of information there that we like to try and keep simple but informed. So yeah, head over there and check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I'll link that in the show description. What's the, just tell us what the website is so we can easily find it just for everyone.
Yeah, it's hunterandgatherfoods.com. Just, yeah, you'll find us on Google.
Yeah, perfect. No, we'll do that. I'll share it in the description. I encourage everyone to go and look. And for everyone who's in the UK as well, I encourage you to go and try and use their products if you haven't already. And thanks again, Jeff, for giving us your time today.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
No problem at all. We'll speak again soon. For everyone else, we will see you next week for another episode. And until then, let's get optimal together.